Welcome to the end of week 6. A lot of you are working hard on the boards, the discussion boards, and some of you haven't started. You say you're about to start, so it's nice to have a virtual college class where you can kind of come and go as you please and start things. All of you have heard from me this week. I just check in on people once in a while. If you're in the middle of everything and you're going pretty fast, that's great. If you're just starting and this is your time to go, that's okay too. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the discussion board postings. In my announcements, certainly I am posting the rubric, what I'm grading from, but I'm also kind of emphasizing what's really important. So, you can earn a maximum of 10 points per discussion board question response. Only 4 is from the initial assignment answer. The 2 responses are actually 3 points each. And to get the full 3 points, they really ought to be thoughtful. They really ought to add to the discussion. Reply posts shouldn't just say, yeah, that's a great idea. It should also bring up questions. It should also be reflective. And certainly add additional information because that can be really important. It also talks about here on the grading rubric of you label the heading appropriately and respect the privacy, refrain from sharing your peers' postings without permission. Okay, here I'm going over the rating scale. So, the value and your response. Basically, your initial post should really display a clear understanding of the course material. Some of you are cutting it pretty short. I've been pretty kind about that just because, beginnings are hard and I don't want you to have a hard start to the course, but you should definitely explain your answer with a few paragraphs, not just one short one. This is your communication in this course. This is your participation grade essentially, because we're not in a face-to-face course where you're answering questions, raising your hand, where there's not a few hours. So this is the only grade you get really for participation through the discussion board postings. You should really show a clear understanding of course material and your responses. Definitely have your responses contribute to the discussion. It shows kind of that it should be a quality response. You will get a 1 or a 0 if your responses to others are not connected to and do not add to the discussion. They represent possible points, the scoring standard. You must achieve at least 75% or higher to demonstrate competence. Please forgive my Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, but I just love Calvin and Hobbes. And I think it's funny because I've met a lot of people in the field that were starting to get burned out, and they remind me of this cartoon where I don't believe in ethics anymore. It's not like they say that, but they don't pay as close attention to the ethics and boundaries that are in the field. I've been in the helping professions for about 20 years or more. And I've seen unfortunately, I've seen just about every ethical violation you can imagine. And by some of the nicest, wonderful workers that you could ever meet. So I don't want you to think that there tends to be these awful people, rare awful people that don't pay attention to ethics, legal, or professional issues. It tends to be people that either don't know about them, but they should, and it's your responsibility to know the ethics regarding your profession, and you should also know the ethics and boundaries at wherever you work. I hope you all find a workplace where you have a mentor or somebody that can teach you these things, but many of us had to kind of struggle through it. So, I think that a large part of understanding ethical issues is being self-aware. So please pay attention to page 31. I know not all of you are there yet, and some of you are beyond, but in all of your classes we're going to talk about, the instructors will talk about ethics and boundaries. Why? It can be such a difficult topic to think about when you're almost in the field or when you're interning, but you need to be aware of this. The book talks about self-awareness, that it can help you have an in-depth look at yourself. You need to know your style. You need to know, are you somebody that might cut corners? How can you not do this? Ethics and boundaries include doing your paperwork on time. Ethics and boundaries can include how you treat clients and not having dual relationships with them. Years ago, counselors really did have personal friendships with many of their clients. There wasn't rules and laws and boundaries about this. Not all did, but some did. The field was very new, and many people didn't have a degree at all when they began counseling in AODA. They may have had trainings and things like that in mental health back in the day, but they didn't have the education that people have today. So they didn't know that this was a bad, necessarily could be a bad thing. So they would go to, in the AODA field, they would go to AA meetings with people and then they would counsel them. I find that very strange, but I'm told this was the norm. And your friends were often also your clients at times because boundaries were crossed when many of the people in AODA counseling were also in recovery. You also need to be aware, very aware of yourself, and because of counter-transference. In these situations, the counselor might intervene inappropriately because the client has triggered as an emotional issue within the counselor based on the counselor's history with significant others. It can be tough at times if you have had, for example, issues with your father, and a man comes in about his age and starts talking to you about his problems. This is where supervision comes into play. Whether you're going into the AODA field, the mental health field, whether you're a case manager, a crisis worker, all of those positions have supervision where you can talk about these things. And I think it's important to be honest and say, hey, this is something that I'm real concerned about. This person reminds me of my brother, sister, mother, ex-girlfriend, old boss. That was really a challenge for me, and to talk about those things. Unresolved issues can really be difficult, but if you're aware of them, you can deal with them and talk about them in supervision. I mentioned dual relationships before, and some of you are probably surprised that, years ago dual relationships were much more common. I think that some of you who live in rural areas, I grew up in a tiny town of Amherst. Back then we were about 800 people. I think they're going on a few thousand now, but it's still small. Dual relationships are very difficult in the town of Wausau, even though it's bigger, but it certainly can be a problem in perhaps Antigo or Merrill or Phillips, because you may be a counselor there or a caseworker, but you may go to church with some of your clients. You may see your clients at the grocery store. You certainly could strike up a friendship with them quite easily in many situations. I think it's important for you to understand why you can't do that. Dual relationships is more than one kind of relationship with a client. I think that it would be very difficult for you to be a counselor to your best friend, for example, or to be a counselor to your mother or father in a professional capacity. And I think most of you understand that. But you also need to be careful if you have a dual relationship, because there may be emotional damage clients may have. If they consider you a friend and then you have to report them to their probation officer, or you consider them a friend and you have to do different things in a professional capacity, it can get really difficult for you. You don't want to get in that situation. Some of you may have already had situations like that in your own working life, even if it's not in a human service professional capacity. And you'll be talking about this more in other classes also. It can be a very challenging thing, like I said, even especially in rural communities. Another thing that I want to mention is confidentiality. When someone comes to you and you're working with them in the human service arena in a professional capacity, of course you're going to keep confidentiality. Doesn't matter if you see them in public. It doesn't matter if somebody asks you, oh, how do you know them? If they say hi to you at the grocery store. Then the fact that you're seeing them in a professional capacity, you need to keep confidential. You also need to pay attention to privileged communication. It's the statutory right that protects clients from having their confidence revealed publicly. There are some exceptions to that, and if you're a counselor, you say that every time you meet a new client. We explain each time that your information will remain confidential unless you could be of harm to self or others, or if you reveal that you could be about to harm an elderly person or a child. Those are the exceptions. And it's important that you always say that, because that's the exceptions. You have to break the rules for that. You obviously can't let someone harm someone else and you're aware of it. There's been lawsuits about that where people prized confidentiality above saving someone's life. And anyway, you can Google that. There's been some stories like that, and there's laws based on those cases. One person sent me an email stating that cultural competence is overwhelming, and I agree. You are going to be working with so many different people from so many different cultures when you're in the field that it can be kind of overwhelming. But you should know that there are so many trainings on cultural competence. I'm including one of SAMHSA's free books on cultural competence at the end of this announcement. You need to be able to be sensitive. You need to understand cultural norms and behaviors. However, you're not going to know everything about everyone. And here's a little trick that I have, not really a trick, but here's a little tip that I have always done. I don't assume anything when I'm working. What I do is I'll ask the client, please teach me how to treat you, because you can't assume that one person of a certain culture is exactly the same as another. If you are working with two Hmong or Laotian clients, you can't assume you can't assume that they're both the same. You can't assume that you should treat them both the same because they are Hmong or Laotian. It is the same with Latinos. It is the same with Asian American families or African American families. I'm a big fan of asking people and not assuming, because I wouldn't want people to assume things about me simply because of my last name, the way I look, or the fact that I am of a particular culture. That said, you should still be familiar with different cultures and keep yourself up to date on the literature. Never assume, but always remain informed. If you have any other questions or concerns about Learning Plan 2, Chapter 2, please let me know. There's a lot of great information extra that you could read through SAMHSA, and you can certainly search through that website. Take care, and I will talk to you next week.